Welcome to today's edition of Business Morning. We're live to you from the nation's capital, Abuja, venue of the Nigeria Economic Summit, the 22nd edition of the Nigeria Economic Summit. Right about now, sessions, of course, have started focusing on how to improve Made in Nigeria. It was a very interesting conversation yesterday, various breakout sessions that focused on the creative industry, focused on agro-processing, focused on ICT, key sectors, key industries, of course, that actually produce Made in Nigeria. And so the various conversations was about funding, infrastructure, basically economic and social infrastructure, those things that affect how businesses operate in Nigeria. Today promises also to be very interesting because today is the last day. There's got various sessions as well that will be focusing on some of the issues that was raised yesterday at this event. One of those I'm sure a lot of people will find very interesting is a session that will focus on ease of doing business. Remember that the federal government has continuously said they will do the best they can to improve the operating environment, not just for domestic investors, but for foreign investors as well. But right about now, as the conversation goes on about how to take Nigeria out of recession, you're focusing on how to build the economy, turning your attention to those key critical sectors and industries. That's what the conversation is all about. And yesterday at a round table where the Vice President actually was in attendance along with the private sector and of course some governors, that was a focus. How to create jobs, how to improve the skills gap, and how to have a robust employment scheme. So let's quickly listen to that particular to what the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, said yesterday during the roundtable meeting, and we'll come back and continue the conversation. We've got other guests on the program who will be talking about some of the issues, including protection of your trademarks, protecting you when, for instance, somebody steals your ideas, what you should do, who you should be talking to, and we're also talking about the issues with regards to tax. All of that's on the program, but let's listen to Professor Yemi Osinbajo as he spoke yesterday on job creation, skills gap, and employment.
There is a job creation unit in my office, and that job creation unit actually has worked out a framework with the NESG, and basically we're looking at three important sectors. We're looking at agriculture and the agro-allied value chain. We're looking at construction and ICT and technology. With the agric and agro-allied, I'm sure that His Excellency Governor Bagudu will be able to give us some further insight. With respect to agriculture and agro-allied, we're looking at how to create opportunities in agriculture, especially the areas that government intends to be self-sufficient. Those areas, the types of produce being rice, wheat, and in some sorghum, soybeans, cashew. There are quite a few of those areas. Tomatoes. But if you take rice, for example, I mean that's an area where we think that there's a lot to be done and can be done very quickly. We think that jobs can be created, a large number of jobs can be created in farming as well as in the whole value chain, from milling to storage, and of course the whole farm to market or farm to table, depending on how one looks at this. Then there are a series of opportunities in the agro-allied industry itself, the processing of cashew, processing of tomatoes, processing of various crops that we've looked at and we think will work. In construction, we're tying this to the social housing program of the federal government. Now, I'm not so sure whether you've heard about the Family Homes Fund. The Family Homes Fund is actually a financial intervention into social housing. We are trying to raise a fund which will come to about ₦1 trillion, and already we have money to aggregate funds from the private sector, from funds, local and international funds, and the whole idea is to be able to intervene in mortgage financing, so that developers can actually use this fund to build social housing to the specifications of the government. Already about 8 or 9 states have given land and have actually given certificates of occupancy for this social housing scheme. The idea is that any Nigerian who can afford 30,000 naira a month ought to be able to own a home. Now, the job creation opportunities there, of course, immense. We're looking at technicians, tile layers, bricklayers, all manner of jobs, engineers, the whole spectrum of jobs in the construction industry. And we think that training of these individuals, like Alhaji Dangote is one of the private sector people that has offered training for this particular project. So a lot of training of technicians, artisans, and all of that will take place here. So it's a skills to job, skills to enterprise type arrangement, which we think will benefit a great deal from this social housing fund. There is a focus on trying to ensure that it's easy to do business, to create an environment where you can actually, where for the small investor and for the large investor, you have enough incentives and an enabling environment to do business. There's no question at all that there's an issue with funding, and of course that's fairly complicated. In the first place, on account of government borrowing, it's a bit difficult for the central bank, understandably, to lend for commercial banks to lend at below inflation and even possibly below the TB rates, below the Treasury bill rates. There are complications around that. And that's why, in the short term, intervention funds are what we think might work. So we're looking at intervention funds in agriculture, so we have the Anchor Borrowers Program, where we're resuscitating the Bank of Agriculture, recapitalizing, and we expect that the Bank of Agriculture and a few other banks will be able to provide some, cheap funds for agriculture, and we're already seeing that in the Anchor Borrowers Program, which Governor Bagudu mentioned. We also think that intervention funds in certain other areas might help before we're able to get the overall, monetary environment right. But in the meantime, we really, if you look at what a lot of banks are experiencing, obviously, to expect the banks to lend at some 10% is probably going to be very difficult, having regard, especially to government borrowing, which is something that we have to look at long term, but those are other issues. Aside from that, power is clearly, an issue that we have to deal with. And we're very focused on trying to improve the power supply situation. I'm sure that if you were following as of February 2016, we were already at 5,000 megawatts of power, which was our incremental power program, but of course, with the vandalization of the Forcados export terminal and vandalization of several other terminals, we lost just Forcados alone, we lost 40% of gas. So really, that affected the overall program. But we think that with some of the efforts that have been made, and possibly with some stability coming to the Niger Delta, we should be able to deal with the power situation. One of the important things I think that has emerged, at least in the past year, is the great enthusiasm that I see everywhere for doing things Nigerian, for local production, employment generation, and all of those kinds of things. And talking to practically everyone, talking to big investors, the big businesses, talking to youth groups that are interested in technology, talking to farmers, and talking to market men, market women. There's a great deal of enthusiasm. Everybody knows that this country has tremendous potential and there's so much that can be done. I think that what we really need to do is continuing these engagements, teasing out what the issues are and trying to deal with those issues as we go along. And you talk about NAFTAC. We're engaging every one of the agencies that are responsible for facilitating trade, facilitating business. They have to be up to scratch. They've got to encourage business. It's our business to make sure that we promote business, promote enterprise, because the only way to create employment is not by direct creation of jobs by government, it's by private sector being encouraged to create these opportunities. So that's our focus. I think for us, it's a day-by-day thing. All of the ministers who are seated here, we're constantly engaged in this conversation. I mean, the Minister of Agriculture will tell you, or Trade and Investment. In the past 2-3 days, we've been to the Minister of Investment, the Minister of State, and I have been in 2 different local exhibitions on cottage industries. And when Natasha was talking about cottage industries, we've been in 2 since Friday. We've been in 2 different exhibitions, or even 3. So there's a lot going on, and I think that continuing the engagement is important. But I want to assure everyone that the government, the federal government of Nigeria, and many of the state governments that are working with us are very focused on this same issue of ensuring that we're able to improve the environment for doing business, increase opportunities, so that we can employ, the vast majority of our young people who need employment, encourage big business, encourage small business, encourage cottage industries. That's our focus, and will remain our focus. Funding is one. I was just trying to go into some of the specific details that have been mentioned: funding, infrastructure, especially power, for tax, and for duty waivers and all that. Agricultural equipment essentially is supposed to be duty on agricultural equipment between 0 and 5%. In most cases, 0%. But you see, what you tend to find is that sometimes, for instance, I've had situations where people, when you say sometimes that a person wants to import agricultural equipment, we've had situations where what is imported, is not, would fit into any category. Mm-hmm. So, for example, somebody imports, when you have some of these duty waivers, the abuse of the duty waivers, you have someone who says, I'm supposed to be importing prefabricated greenhouses, but actually he's importing prefabricated houses. So it's not actually importing prefabricated. So there are quite a few abuses. But I think that in the implementation of the duty waivers, there are complications with that. But by and large, there are waivers on duties for agriculture and for several other such items. Because agriculture in particular, but the implementation of it may not be perfect. I know that there are complaints. I've had discussions with Alaji Dangote, for instance, about some of these issues and all that. But I think that there are some of those incentives. Tax holidays, there are tax holidays for growing businesses, 5 years, as he's mentioned. But I think that we need to, there are areas where clearly there is need for improvement. Just as he said, there are certain areas that need longer holidays. So you can't have a one-size-fits-all for tax holidays. So there are areas where we need to revisit and revise. And part of what the Enabling Business Council is doing is looking at those incentives. And I think Enilama, the Minister for Investment, mentioned all of that yesterday. As part of the work that PEBEC is doing, is looking at those specific areas and trying to see what we can do. And we're taking a lot of advice from the private sector about those areas. So there are, issues, but a lot of these are developing, they're evolving, and I think that we certainly will get there as we go along.
Vice President Professor Yemi Oshibajo speaking on what the federal government plans to do with regards to job creation, skills gap, and employment. The conversation doesn't end. Of course, the summit is still ongoing. Right about now is a plenary on mitigating the impact of crisis and conflict, which of course is another factor that affects the Made in Nigeria campaign. Well, Business Morning continues in just a moment, but before we go, you remember we've got a poll running on the show, which is which products made in Nigeria by Nigerians do you use or have you given as a gift? So we have hashtag clothes and jewelry, hashtag hair accessories, hashtag footwear, slippers and shoes, that is, hashtag bathroom supplies, hashtag none. You can tweet your answers and responses or comments to at BizMorning, or you can send us an email to businessmorning@channelstv.com.